三藩市第1區市參事候選人星島中文電台現場辯論。
早晨各位，時間嚟到8點33分啦。咁啊，今日係一個特別嘅節目啦嚇。咁就係由三藩市嘅第1區嘅即係列治文區嘅3位市參事嘅候選人呢，就進行現場嘅辯論嘅。咁我哋呢，就將會喺電台啦，同埋咧 YouTube 星 TV 咧同步直播嘅。咁大家而家喺鏡頭上呢，都應該見到3位㗎啦。如果你開咗呢個星 TV 嘅話 ，YouTube 星 TV 啊。咁今次辯論呢，我哋負責提問嘅呢，就係有《星島日報》美西版嘅副總編輯陳之欣嘅Joyce， 早晨。
早晨 Cindy， 大家好。咁就冇嘥時間，因為時間好緊迫嚇。
係。多
謝大家參加。咁我哋今次咧就3位亞裔即係華裔嘅市參事候選人咧就嚟參加呢個辯論。咁就包括陳思敏、Connie Chan， 跟住 David Lee 就李志威，同埋 Mahjong Philhauer 埋真。咁我哋就會按呢個佢哋姓名嘅即係個字母姓氏係啦，嚟安排個時間。跟住咧就會輪住就個個就 take turn 就轉下呢個次序嘅，咁就包括有開場白啦，跟住就有呢個我哋嘅問題，跟住佢哋就候選人自己互相提一個問題，跟住就係呢個結束語。咁所以我哋都會有呢個多謝佢哋嘅 team 啦，就會有呢個 Cantonese 呢個廣東話嘅粵語即場翻譯嘅。咁啊就我哋就開始啦。OK， so thank you for all the candidates and thank you for coming to this candidate debate for San Francisco Board of Supervisors District 1 election. And we have Connie Chan, David Lee, and Mahjong Philhauer join us, the 3 Asian and Chinese American candidates in this race. And we'll have an opening statement, and then goes back to moderate question and answer, and then candidate question and answer, and also and the end is the closing statement. And we also already tell them the procedure, so we won't waste any time now. So let's have the opening statement by Connie Chan first. And also thank you for the team for the Cantonese translation.
OK, Connie, start.
大家好，我係陳思敏，我選第1區市參事。咁我喺香港出世，係13歲嘅時候移民嚟到三藩市嘅。我係第一代嘅移民。咁我就喺三藩市嘅時候咧，我媽媽就一直係喺華埠度居住。咁我係從加利奧高中畢業，咁然之後咧之後就上加州戴維斯大學畢業嘅。喺我畢業咗之後咧，翻嚟到三藩市繼續服務我哋嘅社區。喺現時咧就同我嘅伴侶啦，佢係三藩市嘅消防員。咁我哋就有個7歲嘅仔仔，咁喺三藩市公校度讀書嘅第2年班。咁我喺過去15年裏邊咧，一直服務我哋三藩市嘅社區，從身為市參事助理啦，直至到喺地檢處幫助我哋受害者提供援助，仲有就係三藩市嘅公園康樂部同埋三藩市市立大學度繼續服務嘅。咁其中咧，我亦都有從市參事配司金合作提供撥款重建我哋嘅黃顯裕公園同埋我哋嘅花園角嘅。咁我亦希望藉著呢個機會咧，能夠參選市參事，繼續回饋翻我哋嘅華人社區。多謝晒。
Okay, the next we'll have David Lee, 李志威。
Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, and job training, particularly the ESL students, English Second Language students. I am also the longtime executive director of the Chinese American Voters Education Committee, where we've registered over 100,000 Chinese Americans, Asian Americans to vote in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm running for supervisor because I oppose the tax increases that are on the November ballot. I'm trying to support small businesses, and I'm also trying to bring BART to the Richmond district. So with that, let's do the translation.
我係李志威，我住喺三藩市土生土長，便住喺列治文區有36年。咁我喺做咗我喺做咗教師有15年。咁我又根據攞咗政府嘅經費1.5萬咧，1.5萬咧，就150萬咧，就增加咗為我哋華裔增加工作訓練同埋選民委員做選民嘅教育。咁我就曾經做過華裔選民教育中心嘅行政主任。咁我亦都代表小商業。咁我最重要嘅政綱就係我反對增加稅，所有嘅 薪金稅、銷售稅、房地產稅、地產轉移稅，呢啲都會增加我哋所有人嘅負擔。咁我亦都希望我哋能夠把嗰個地鐵延長到我哋列治文區。
Thank you, David。多謝晒李志威。咁我而家就嚟到麥真，我張張後。Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Marjorie Philhauer. Excited to be running for Richmond District Supervisor, although I'm sure my fellow candidates can attest. Campaigning in the midst of a pandemic, it's something that's very different. And, you know, I want to thank Sing Tao for hosting and being very creative in how to engage your readers and listeners in this race. So I was born here in the Richmond. My parents immigrated to San Francisco in 1968 from the Philippines and Iran. They met at the test of English as a foreign language and came to San Francisco for a reason. There's a reason why they chose San Francisco as new immigrants. It's because of our inclusivity. It's because of our diversity and the values of community, which they raised myself and my siblings in. So for the past 30 years, I've worked in government as well as started 2 small businesses here in San Francisco. At the federal level, I worked as a legislative aide on Capitol Hill and various other positions, as well as in this California governor's office as senior advisor to the chief of staff. I also worked in the mayor's office for 20 months after she was elected. I have firsthand experience on what it's like to run a business here in San Francisco. For 10 years, I ran a strategic communications firm. And really felt the impacts of our lack of infrastructure, high-rising housing costs, and also just how hard it is to live and work in San Francisco. For the past 2 years, my sister and I have run a gift shop and pottery studio here in the neighborhood. I also started the Balboa Village Merchants Association with many local merchants, and as supervisor would work to not only support our local businesses, in addition to our monolingual speaking businesses, but also to address issues of homelessness and clean streets and public safety.
你好，我係麥真競選活動嘅中文傳媒聯絡總監梁慧珊，今日會為麥真進行翻譯。麥真表示能夠參選三藩市第一區市參事，佢感到雀躍。喺呢一個大流行疫症期間展開呢個競選活動，同以往有啲唔同。佢好多謝星島電台喺呢個時候充滿創意安排大家進行呢一次嘅辯論。麥真嘅家長喺1968年嚟到三藩市，佢哋喜歡三藩市嘅多元化同埋欣賞佢哋社區嘅價值。喺過去30年，麥真擁有公職經驗，包括喺國會、州長、市長辦公室嘅層面。另外，佢喺做生意方面亦都有親身嘅經驗。喺過去2年，佢同佢嘅妹妹一齊喺列治文區度做小生意。麥真亦都參與白煲華商家協會嘅工作，支持本地嘅商家，特別係嗰啲只係講中文嘅商家。另外，麥真亦都支持清潔街道同埋公共安全嘅議題。不斷麥真。
跟住落嚟咧，佢哋各自已經發表咗6分鐘連埋翻譯6分鐘嘅呢個政綱之後咧，跟住我就輪到係主持人嘅提問啦。
Thank you. Now it's back to moderate question answer area. 咁我哋第一個問題就係、請問大家即係候選人嚇，你有咩具體嘅措施你可以作為承諾？如果你當選市參事，就會改善到列治文地區即係居民嘅生活。跟住我哋就係以李志威，跟住麥真，跟住陳思敏呢個次序。So the first question is, if you got elected, what is the priorities for your platform to help the district one?
First, I'll address the homeless issue. I believe that I'm the only major candidate that opposed building a homeless shelter in the Richmond district. I do not believe that we should have a navigation center in the Richmond. Instead, I think we should use the $600 million in Prop C funds to buy supportive housing for the homeless and to put homeless populations near services that can help them. I also would work to help the small businesses in our community by streamlining regulations and making it easier for our small businesses to succeed. Thirdly, I would bring BART to the Richmond district. I am a big believer in public transportation, and BART to the Richmond has been talked about for over 25 years. Now there is funding for it. We should push ahead and bring BART to the Richmond district, and as supervisor, I will do that. I will bring BART to the Richmond district. And finally, I will work to help make our streets cleaner and safer for everyone.
我對具體對列治文區嘅建議就係，我第一就係所有候選人除咗我之外，我係強烈反對喺列治文區建個遊民中心，寧願把嗰啲錢呢作為資助遊民同埋居民佢哋嘅改善佢哋嘅生活。我亦支持啲小商業呢，幫佢哋發展得更好，減少嗰啲冇必要嘅法規，使佢哋容易運作。我另外再支持就係捷運呢延長去列治文區，因為我哋列治文區嘅交通好需要有捷運嚟幫助我哋載大家去返工返學。咁已經講捷運延長到列治文區已經講咗25年啦。而家好難得有經費咧，咁我哋希望把呢個經費延長嚟我哋列治文區。
咁都好短啊！咁我哋跟住落嚟啦，麥珍。
So if I were elected as supervisor, top 3 priorities, I think number 1 is how we recover from this pandemic. And we will recover, and how the new normal will look is going to be a little different. I think we need to focus, number 1, on our recovery in public health, and number 2, in our economic recovery. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a co-founder of the Balboa Village Merchants Association. During this pandemic, started a collaborative of businesses to support businesses through the pandemic, not just in support in participating in programs like the Shared Spaces program, but getting more creative and ensuring that businesses, especially our monolingual owned businesses, have access in language to non-cash platforms so that they can stay in business and also do business online. I think, we need to address homelessness here in the Richmond. During this pandemic, there have been 3 encampments in the Richmond, and there isn't one solution to homelessness. Number 1, we need to stop the housing insecurity that can lead to homelessness. And so we need to stop that from happening in the first place. We also need to address mental illness that so many are suffering from. And strengthen our conservatorship laws, and also substance use disorder that many on our streets are suffering from. We need to ensure that we're supporting them through that. In addition, supporting safe, clean streets. We definitely need more trash cans on our streets from the beach all the way to Arguello. I mean, we see a lot of litter on our streets, and I think people want to be able to put their trash somewhere, but also we need to ensure that we have safety mechanisms in place in our neighborhood. Just this weekend, several stores were broken into or vandalized on Clement and Geary, many of them Asian-owned. Back to you, Helen.
請翻譯。
馬珍啱啱就表示啦，如果佢當選嘅話咧，佢第一樣要做嘅咧就係幫助大家從呢個大流行疫症度恢復過嚟。咁喺公共衛生方面同埋經濟方面都要着手處理。咁佢馬珍本身咧就係白波華商家協會嘅共同創立人，佢會支持商家渡過呢一個大流行疫症，而且會好有創意咁幫佢哋渡過呢一個難關，特別係嗰啲只係講中文嘅商家，佢會確保佢哋有語言嘅渠道。除咗可以一般嘅做生意方式之外，亦都可以上網營商。咁喺處理無家可歸者問題方面，第一，首先要避免有人成為無家可歸者，將呢一個問題唔好俾佢發生先。第二就係處理精神健康嘅問題，而第三就係濫用藥物嘅問題。另外，佢亦都會保持街道嘅清潔同埋安全。好多地方都有垃圾，佢希望可以咧令到呢啲垃圾可以好好咁樣處理。另外咧，亦都要保持列治文區嘅治安，因為有好多嘅商家都被人爆竊同埋破壞。Back to you, John.
Okay, we're good on time. So now, Connie, you can have a chance to answer this before our going to the news. Thank you. Now, 陳思敏，唔該。
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I think that as a priority, it has always been the same, and even before the pandemic, but even more so now, more than ever, is that to really make sure that we keep our tenants, but also homeowners, especially the homeowners on fixed income, to stay house. I think those are critical key to make sure that people can actually stay where they live, and definitely also making sure that small business, they're the backbone of our local economy. Let's also make sure that we can provide clear guidelines for our small business and local assistance to make sure that we can help them reopen safely, for their workers to return to work safely as well. And to also help them to, as we recover from this economy, to have state and federal assistance to help them really to recover. And, I think that there's also really goal to really make sure that we make, especially for a monolingual business, to make our city government's permitting process with cultural and language competency to assist them, especially during this pandemic. And I think last but not least is to balance the city budget to make sure that we can keep city services like public transit, truly, yes, clean streets, to maintain that level of services to help everybody. So I think that is what those are the three critical keys issues that I will be working on. 我可以講中文，
係可以講中文啦。
多謝晒。咁我覺得咧能夠即係最主要其實咧喺我哋呢個疫情之前咧，其實有一啲已經係好重要㗎啦，係對我哋三藩市嘅經濟嚟講。咁當然咧呢個疫情影響之下咧，就更加嘅對我哋嘅經濟更加嘅有影響，嚴重嘅影響。咁所以我覺得首先其實係幫助我哋嘅租客啦，但係亦都係我哋嘅屋主，尤其是係屋主係有限制有收入嘅屋主，讓佢哋能夠繼續係住翻喺佢哋屋企裏邊嘅。咁我哋除咗咁樣之外咧，亦都係要了解到我哋嘅小商業其實對我哋當地嘅經濟係極之有非常之重要咧。咁所以我哋要幫助我哋嘅小商業，咁能夠得到州政府同埋聯邦政府嘅援助。唔單止係咁，亦都要求我哋嘅市政府能夠有明白嘅雙語文化嘅服務，去幫助我哋，尤其是淨係識得講中文嘅小商業，讓佢哋能夠渡過呢一個經濟嘅難關。咁當然最後咧，亦都係即係要求我哋嘅市政府咧，因為而家係呢個赤字嘅經濟預算，我哋應該咧平衡呢個預算，讓我哋能夠繼續我哋嘅市政府服務，譬如講我哋嘅公共交通啦，讓我哋嘅街道咧係更加嘅清潔啦，呢啲都其實市政府需要提供嘅服務，我哋一定要讓佢繼續落去。咁即係亦都即係話我哋要平衡市政府預算嘅。多謝晒。
係咁幾位嘅候選人呢，佢哋嘅答題呢都非常之簡潔啊，所以我哋嘅時間呢今日都幾充裕嘅。咁喺度再度提醒下各位啦，如果你啱啱先留開收音機嘅話呢，其實我哋今日由8點半至到10點鐘呢，就有一個特別嘅節目，咁就係請嚟三藩市嘅第一區嘅3位嘅市參事候選人，咁分別就係陳思敏啦、李志威咧同埋麥珍呢，就上到嚟節目咧現場辯論嘅。咁我哋同步除咗電台之外呢，仲有係星 TV、YouTube 咧都係直播嘅。咁我哋今日嘅提問人呢，就係有《星島日報》嘅副總編輯啦，美西版嘅副總編輯陳之恩喺度咧，作為一個提問人嘅。咁我哋或者到咗呢度咧，我哋先休息一陣間先，稍後翻嚟仲有1個鐘頭嘅節目嘅時間。咁我哋嘅提問人呢，就會就住各位華人關心嘅議題關心嘅問題咧，就向3位嘅候選人呢就查詢嘅。咁佢哋各自咧都有帶翻譯過嚟嘅。咁我哋先休息一陣間先，稍後翻嚟咧繼續呢個節目。
三藩市第一區市參事候選人星島中文電台現場辯論。
冇錯啦，翻嚟咧，我哋三藩市第一區市參事嘅候選人，即係列治文區3位嘅市參事候選人，分別咧我哋有陳思敏啦、李志威同埋麥珍呢，就上到嚟現場呢，就係辯論嘅。咁我哋由8點半開始咧，直至到10點鐘。咁我哋嘅提問人呢，就係由《星島日報》美西版嘅副總編輯陳之恩呢，就負責提問嘅。咁頭先呢，就已經幾位嘅候選人呢答咗第一個問題㗎咯。咁跟住落嚟呢，我哋有第2個問題啦。
Yeah, welcome back. So this is continue our debate. Now we rotate the turn to answer questions. It will be Mahjong first, and then Connie, and then David. So the second question will be, we all know Chinese American, Asian Americans like 1/3 population of San Francisco, but recently, or recent years, we see our political cloud is diminished, such as we don't have any department heads who are Chinese or Asian American, and also there's maybe a chance we only have one Asian American supervisor on the board of supervisors. So if you got elected, what will your address this issue？ 咁我哋就知道三藩市其實華人喺三藩市嘅人口咧都係華人同埋亞裔嚇，已經佔到1/3咁多。咁但係我哋近年來咧，我哋就睇到我哋嘅政治力量即係有所薄弱。咁包括我哋就而家呢個所有市府嘅局長級呢個冇即係華人代表啦。跟住我哋有可能今次選舉之後，只剩翻一位嘅華人市參事。咁就想問下各位候選人應該。如果佢可以當選，佢會點樣應對呢個問題？咁我哋就換個次序，就由埋真開始，跟住陳思敏，跟住就李志威。So, Mahjong, please.
You're absolutely correct. Our Chinese American community is a very significant part of why our city is so great and so diverse and so accessible to so many. And our next supervisor, especially representing such a large Chinese American community here in the Richmond district, must prioritize enhancing and preserving that voice, ensuring that our Chinese American neighbors have a seat at the table. So I have a many years long track record of working with Chinese American leaders here in San Francisco. On the record in supporting my campaign, State Treasurer Fiona Ma, Assembly Member David Chu, Assessor Carmen Chu, former Supervisor Katie Tang, as well as the Chinese American Democratic Club and the Ed Lee Asian Pacific American Democratic Club. Also, through this pandemic, I've tried to demonstrate how I would be inclusive of our Chinese American community if I'm elected. For example, we hosted a neighborhood summit called We Are the Richmond, where each of our working groups, we had 13 working groups where we worked together on Zoom, and neighbors led these working groups. We ensured that we had Chinese representation in our working groups, as well as Chinese translation at our summit and also in our materials that we disseminated. We need to have in-language support for our Chinese American neighbors as well. So basically, our supervisor needs to ensure that we are communicating, but also engaging with our Chinese American community in a way that is meaningful. Go ahead, Alice.
好，翻譯。
艾珍啱啱就表示咧，佢知道華人喺三藩市係代表住一個重要嘅人數㗎。咁所以咧，佢如果當選嘅話咧，佢會確保呢一個溝通咧繼續可以做得好㗎。咁佢會將同華人溝通定為呢個優先嘅次序，咁去加強同保留華人嘅聲音。另外咧，佢同好多嘅華人嘅民選官員咧都有合作無間嘅經驗㗎。咁例如啦，有財長馬世雲啦。州眾議員邱信福、三藩市古籍官朱家文、前三藩市市參事湯海蒂、華裔民主黨協進會同埋李孟賢亞太裔民主黨協會。另外咧，喺疫情期間嘅競選活動咧，麥珍亦都嘗試去包括晒華人嘅聲音，例如佢喺9月12號舉行過一個社區峰會，名為咧我們是列治文一份子。咁當中咧有13個工作小組咧係進行唔同嘅調查，了解華人咧對呢個列治文區唔同議題嘅意見㗎。咁期間亦都有中文嘅翻譯服務提供，咁確保咧華人社區可以同佢有良好嘅溝通。Back to you.
Thank you. Connie.
Thank you. I am, a Chinese first generation immigrant. And I really have the understanding of the hardship that our Chinese-speaking immigrants in San Francisco, that was and still is my life. And I have served in our community for a long time, starting out as a organizer, interpreter, in fact, for Chinese-American victims with San Francisco Safe. And, throughout my time in public service, have always been making sure that there is translation services provided, but also cultural competent city services through Recreation Park Department. That was actually under Mayor Lee, was our mayor at that time. I've served with many different Chinese American elected officials throughout my time, including my time in City College of San Francisco, making sure that we have free higher education. Because that is critical for our Chinese American community. And that is the reason why I have the endorsement like Supervisor Sandra Lee Fewer, Supervisor Gordon Marr and Eric Marr, and State Assembly Budget Chair Phil Tang. And it's the reason why they support my work. But it's also, I know that what it means. It means that we need Chinese American representation in city government. We need to appoint them to our commission. We need to make sure that we have fair hiring and retention in our city workers and cities so that we can provide city services with language and cultural competency. And those are critical pieces to serving our community.
好，中文。
好多謝。咁因為我自己係一個移民，我亦都係好清楚到我哋華人喺三藩市生活嘅時候一啲艱辛嘅困境，亦都係因為咁樣，所以我其實第一份工咧係同三藩市防止罪案中心咧，到專門係為受害者度做翻譯嘅。一直以嚟咧喺我嘅工作裏邊咧，都不斷嘅要大家知道我哋係要有翻譯，但唔單止係翻譯，亦都係要對我哋華人文化有了解嘅社區服務。咁亦都係因為咁樣喺三藩市康樂社區部門嘅時候，同埋喺三藩市私立大學嘅時候咧，我同好多唔同嘅我哋嘅華人嘅代表一齊合作，甚至乎係我哋市長係李曼賢市長咧在生嘅時候咧，我亦都係喺嗰度工作過嘅。即係喺康樂部度工作過，咁亦都知道我哋華人社區對我哋嘅高等教育係好受重視，所以喺三藩市私立大學要提供免費高等教育。亦都係因為咁樣，我得到州眾議員嘅丁有立嘅資助同埋背書，仲有市參事李麗嫦、余鼎昂、馬少光、馬少明佢哋嘅支持嘅。因為我亦都知道，咁即係話我哋更加嘅需要華人代表。唔單止係咁，我哋嘅市政府嘅委員會，我哋嘅市政府工作人員都要一定要能夠考慮到有雙語服務嘅能力，同埋亦都能夠了解到我哋華人文化嘅能力，因為呢個係我嘅經驗，亦都會要求我哋市政府有咁樣嘅服務。多謝晒。
Thank you. Now, David.
I've worked for Chinese Americans, voter registration and empowerment for over 25 years. I believe that Chinese Americans have lost political representation. If you look at the last 10 years, we went from having a Chinese American mayor, Chinese American police chief, many department heads. 5 of the members of the board of supervisors were Asian Americans, including the president of the board. And now we are down to just a handful of Chinese American representatives to represent our large and growing community. We're 1/3 of the city's population, and we pay a lot of taxes in this city. That's why I believe that we have to work hard to keep Chinese Americans in San Francisco. So many are struggling. They're being pushed out of the city by rising costs and policies by the city. That's why I'm opposed to raising the taxes during COVID-19, because it's going to hurt our Chinese American community. It will hurt small businesses. It will hurt people who have already been suffering during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we need to be doing everything we can to support Chinese American community. Also, I'm very concerned about the anti-Chinese racism that we see in the Richmond district. Yesterday, 3 Chinese-owned, Asian-owned businesses were attacked and vandalized. It's not the first time. So we need to fight against that, and I'm really concerned that the rhetoric in this campaign has led to anti-Chinese violence and has spurred people to do very bad things to our community.
好，翻譯
代表三藩市華人特別係列住人區，我代表咗25年，我增加大家選民教育，使佢哋大家去投票。 但係最重要嘅呢，我哋三藩市本來我哋有好多市府官員係代表係華人選出嚟嘅代表，但係呢，我哋三藩市而家嘅華人政府官員越來越少，我哋有1/3嘅人口係華人，但係我哋嘅代表，我哋嘅聲音好少。咁我最大嘅反對，我係冇利益團體支持我嘅。我哋三藩市有最高人工嘅市長，咁佢攞咗好多嘅，我哋啲政府官員又攞咗好多嘅經費，佢等於同我哋嘅袋處攞咗我哋啲錢去納入私人利益團體。佢加稅，個個人都話要加稅。我作為民意代表，政府嘅市參事，我應該代表我哋三藩市嘅居民呢，監管政府嘅經費點樣運作，唔可以成日加稅，成日從呢度同我哋袋處攞出錢嚟，就去見呢度見嗰度，都唔體貼我哋嘅需要。咁我哋如果加稅嘅時候，不但止增加我哋所有人，不論係屋主或者住客，增加仲有小商業，增加我嘅負擔。而家疫情咁嚴重，我哋大家都生意都受影響，所以希望係減少呢啲嘅加稅減少。
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering all these questions. Now we're back to our rotation as Connie and David and then Mahjong for question 3. Actually, as David just alluded, now, especially since the pandemic, we see a lot of anti-Asian hate crime targeting Chinese American or even Asian American all over the country, especially in San Francisco Bay Area. And if you're elected, what would you think you're going to address this and what promise you're going to give to the victims? 我哋頭先都提到啦，就好似李志偉講到，從疫情開始我哋就見到係全美國，尤其係三藩市灣區咧，就有好多仇視華人啦，即係嗰啲種族歧視啲事件。咁但係就想問下啲候選人，如果佢當選，佢會點樣處理呢啲問題？即係佢會點樣承諾就保護我哋啲受害人？咁我哋就會翻嚟呢個次序，又係陳思敏、李志偉同埋埋真。咁陳思敏 ，Connie please。
It is definitely very tragic about what is happening to us, especially for us Chinese American community at this moment. That not only that our small business already suffer because of the pandemic and racism against our community. Now that we as a community are also suffering and worrying about our safety when we on the street, and that is unacceptable. And I feel that, I understand that. And I think that what we need to do is we need to continue to encourage and support our community and making sure that they know that we're here for them and that we have a way that they can report the crime safely. If there's any hate crime against them, both for our small businesses and for our Chinese American community individual, that they should know that there is stop AAPI hate, that's where they can report the hate crime, and we're going to tabulate that crime, and let's make sure that we turn this information over and figure out policy solutions, but also programming and support that for the victims. And I do think that is where it comes down to the policymakers. That is, we need to work as a city government. How can we provide both, financial but also social support, for the victims of hate crime, but also to continue to build our Chinese American community again with representation.
好，中文翻譯。
好，咁我其實好明白啊，因為我覺得身為華人，自己本身身為華人咧，亦都係受到呢啲嘅種族歧視。但係其實唔單止係我哋個人啦，而係其實我哋嘅華人小商業亦都受到歧視。尤其是喺呢個疫情嘅影響之下咧，其實我哋嘅經濟已經係受到打擊，因為呢啲歧視，我哋嘅小商業受到好大嘅打擊。咁而家甚至乎我哋而家個人華人都要擔心我哋自己嘅個人安全。其實係好唔公平嘅，咁我覺得咧最主要就係希望大家能夠團結一起，唔好驚。咁我哋應該支持彼此支持，讓我哋大家知道咧，我哋其實有一啲機構咧係可以幫助大家咧係可以安全嘅去報案，讓我哋能夠知道有到底呢啲數字 根據呢啲數字嘅時候咧，我哋可以得到援助、基金嘅援助同埋一啲資源援助。咁我覺得亦都係一個身為一個立法者咧，我哋嘅一個責任嚟嘅。我哋尤其是一個華人立法者，要為我哋嘅華人社區出聲，幫助我哋嘅華人社區提供援助，但係唔係淨係金錢上嘅援助，亦都係其他社區服務裏邊有代表，亦都有援助，能夠真係幫到咗我哋華人社區繼續嘅去企埋一齊，同埋團結一起。多謝晒。
Thank you. Yeah, David, please.
Yeah, this morning I learned about when I was looking at the website about the what's happened in our own supervisor race to Connie Chan. She herself was a target of anti-Chinese racism, and including our incumbent supervisor. While I don't agree with Connie on taxes, and we may differ on policy, there is no reason to attack somebody because they're Chinese. And if you look at what happened to Connie, especially with the posters that have been put up all over the district with her face imposed on cartoons that are racist and that question the patriotism of our Chinese Americans, including our incumbent supervisor. And I do, of course, disagree with Sandra Feuer on many of the policy issues, including taxes and other issues. However, going and attacking somebody's race and patriotism and xenophobia goes below the belt. And this is something that's wrong. It harms the entire community. And it's really sad to see that in our district, which is over 40% Asian, heavily Chinese Americans, that this type of campaigning is happening, and that our Chinese American candidates are facing these kinds of questions and attacks. So I think we should all denounce that.
我今朝見到我哋嗰個新聞上邊，因為我哋要競選市參市呢，我哋嘅候選人有發表言論，Connie Chan 發表言論，有言論上面有反對華人。我哋雖然我哋華人周圍受攻擊，但係呢，我哋冇理由要為住政治咧嚟反對我哋自己華人或者亞裔。我哋列住民區有40%嘅係亞裔，我哋唔可以為住因為怕人被人攻擊咧，我哋唔企喺正義嗰度好似 Sandra Feuer 佢為住反對嗰啲亞裔俾人攻擊咧，咁就做出有啲係違反自己族裔嘅利益嘅語言。我哋希望我哋嘅正義係為自己嘅人出聲。我哋喺三藩市，我哋應該同其他人一樣，有我哋嘅權利，站穩我哋嘅立場，為我哋啲所有嘅同胞服務。不論亞裔邊個族裔，我哋亞裔特別係要保護我哋自己嘅安全。
係，唔該晒。
Yeah, okay, now Marjan, please.
So I 100% agree with my fellow candidates, Connie Chan and David Lee. I think amongst the three of us, we certainly have several disagreements, as well as with Supervisor Feuer, myself, have several disagreements. However, the way this campaign has turned, the anti-Chinese sentiment that, by the way, started in March and April, in our own neighborhood should not be tolerated. We should have zero tolerance and fight against it. We're seeing a lot of tone and tenor issues in this campaign where it's not safe to even have my kids check the mail or go to the farmer's market, right? But this anti-Chinese sentiment should not exist in our neighborhood or anywhere in the city. And I think we as San Franciscans can stand up to that. For me, as someone of mixed racial descent, many of you know my grandfather was half Chinese and half Japanese and grew up in the Philippines. And half of my family is Muslim and Middle Eastern, right? And you're 100% right, David, this falls below the belt, and I denounce and think that we should band together to fight against this rhetoric. Even though we don't agree on everything, this should not be happening. It's toxic, and it it really hits to the core of what we're seeing at the national level, and it's infiltrating itself here in the Richmond. On top of that, we've seen Asian-owned restaurants, not just on Balboa Street, but around the Richmond. I think we need a dedicated liaison in the police department in the Richmond to work with our Asian-owned and Chinese-owned businesses. I know there's a lot of resistance to adding officers, but our Chinese community needs that protection and advocacy. And as supervisor, I would advocate for a dedicated liaison in our police department here in the Richmond. So I'm collectively sorry for all of us that this is happening, and I hope it stops immediately with only 2 weeks left in this campaign.
好，翻譯唔該。
麥珍啱啱就表示咧，佢好同意陳思敏同埋李志威嘅講法，呢一個種族歧視係唔應該存在㗎。咁呢一個反華嘅情緒咧，其實喺3月、4月嘅時候已經開始。我哋對於呢一啲種族歧視應該係零容忍同埋咧共同咧係打擊㗎。咁喺麥珍嘅小朋友，佢都有見到一啲嘅郵件啊，都有充斥住反華嘅情緒。呢啲情緒唔應該存在。麥珍嘅祖父亦都係有一半嘅華裔血統，佢知道呢一個種族歧視反華嘅情緒應該要禁止，因為呢一個情緒係有害㗎，唔應該發生。而有啲餐廳都係華人經營㗎，咁佢哋亦都有受到呢一啲嘅影響。咁佢哋應該同警察部門咧係充分合作，大家一齊咧攜手合作去對抗呢一個問題。而喺華人嘅小生意方面咧，亦都係需要保護同埋需要咧為呢一個問題而進行倡議㗎。Back to you.
大家咧都回答咗啦，比較精簡一啲嘅問題啊。我哋呢度咧先休息一陣間先，稍後翻嚟咧繼續會同3位嘅候選人呢就進行呢一個現場嘅辯論㗎。咁大家聽緊嘅係星島中文電台啦，咁但係同步咧喺呢個星 TV YouTube 嗰度咧係直播㗎。一陣間稍後翻嚟繼續同各位傾過。
三藩市第1區市參事候選人，星島中文電台現場辯論。
好，繼續我哋今日咧就現場辯論啦。咁有三藩市列治文區即係第1區嘅市參事3位嘅候選人啦，分別有陳思敏啦、李志威同埋麥珍呢喺我哋現場咧就係辯論嘅。咁頭先呢，我哋已經就問咗成3個問題㗎啦。繼續落嚟咧第4個問題，我哋交俾阿
Joyce。Okay。So 我哋而家做第4個問題。Now we have the fourth question from the moderator. We all know recently there's a corruption scandal involved San Francisco City Hall department heads and other city commissioners or even businessmen and women. And we, as a supervisor, if you're elected, how would you think there should be or should not be a mechanism to address this issue and to prevent this from happening again? And what are your suggestions, concrete suggestions, please? 我哋就講到就話，而家三藩市就聽過最近呢就比較多一啲呢個腐敗嘅傳聞啦嚇，有 FBI 同埋聯邦調查，三藩市市府律師有調查。咁我就想問下，如果佢哋作為市參事，佢哋應該設立一個點樣嘅機制去防止呢啲政治籌冗問題同埋啲腐敗嚟發生？咁我哋而家嘅 turn 咧就應該從呢個李志威，跟住麥珍，跟住到呢個陳思敏。So the turn will start with David, and then Marjan, and then Connie. Thank you.
Look, the Board of Supervisors have not been doing its job. The Board of Supervisors is supposed to keep an eye on the mayor and the departments to make sure that the money that we are giving them as taxpayers are being spent correctly, not given to their friends and family members as bribes or corrupt contracts. Now, it's really unbelievable the level of corruption that we have seen in certain departments and the guilty pleas that have already been submitted to the FBI. I think this is really a shame on the entire city. We need to clean this up before the taxpayers can be asked for another dime. How do we know if you raise taxes that the tax money will go to what it's supposed to go to and not into someone's pocket? We need to make sure that our department heads are held accountable. Keep in mind we have some of the highest paid government officials in the country, including our mayor, who's the highest paid mayor in the country. We have department heads who are amongst the highest paid in the state of California. And the Board of Supervisors, when they had their chance to trim the budget, instead raided the rainy day fund and gave city workers raises. And they gave themselves raises just a year ago, 12% raise. This is a board that has not kept up with what they're supposed to be doing, which is watching the mayor and making sure that our tax dollars are well used.
作為市參市，我哋應該要做嘅係作為一個橋梁，做市民同埋市政府之間嘅聯絡。我哋應該監管市政府啲錢點樣運用，但係而家我哋三藩市真係不可思議嘅一個貪腐，會把啲政府嘅錢，我哋市民交去嘅所得稅呢，俾啲私人機構、私人嘅廠商入咗佢哋個袋，呢個真係醜聞。我哋大家應該問，我哋加咗嗰啲稅走咗去邊度？所以在加稅之前，我哋係咪應該先問下市政府把啲錢用咗去邊度？政府嗰個每個部門嘅主管應該確實執行嗰啲錢係用喺應該用嘅部分。譬如嚟講，市政府攞咗我哋啲錢，市民加稅嘅錢，去增加嗰啲市政府職員嘅收入，所以舊年增加咗12%，12% 嘅加薪。呢啲我哋反為我哋啲市民同埋小商業呢，就喺水深痛苦之中，冇得生活好困難。咁嗰啲餐館啊，嗰啲商業呢，都好受打擊。我哋嘅商業好難維持，仲要再加我哋嘅嗰啲稅呢。咁仲有市長有成30幾萬嘅年薪，咁我哋嗰啲錢
停咗啊，咁啊繼續啦。
Yeah, Marjan, please.
So what we've been seeing with these FBI scandals and people who have worked in City Hall or served on commission, I mean, it's truly just a stain on our collective city fabric, and it's not something that is, again, zero tolerance for any of that. It's why I support measures like Proposition B on the ballot. I think we need to have more audits of our departments. I think every 4 years we talk about auditing, and we don't really quite see it happening at the scale that we hear about in election years. I think we need to have more transparency in contracting and more accountability in how we contract. I think the Board of Supervisors and a supervisor is very well positioned to ensure that happens. I think we need a stronger ethics commission who can actually investigate and bring justice to this process. Right now, it seems that the Ethics Commission is very much spread thin, and they need more resources to ensure that our local residents are getting the service that they need from local government. And lastly, I get asked a lot about what I learned during my time in City Hall. We need more neighbors in City Hall. We need a more neighborhood voice in City Hall. There are career bureaucrats who make an entire lifetime, right, of a career in City Hall. I think we need new blood and new vision in City Hall. We need to ensure that people that we're appointing to office, just as we appoint more Chinese Americans to boards and commissions, we need more neighbors from our neighborhoods to have a role in government and to really cut through a lot of what is festering through, career bureaucracy in City Hall.
係翻譯唔該。
麥珍啱啱表示咧，對於呢一個市府嘅貪污醜聞同埋政治嘅腐敗問題咧，佢有咁樣嘅回應㗎。佢認為咧呢一個問題大家都係採取零容忍嘅態度，咁就之所以佢支持呢一個 B 提案，佢希望咧有多一啲嘅核數嘅工作可以進行啦，同埋咧喺合約外判方面咧有增加多啲嘅透明度，同埋咧要推行問責制度，要有更加強嘅調查制度啦，令到咧公義可以咧得以伸張㗎。咁另外咧，麥珍希望可以有多啲嘅資源 令到本地嘅居民咧可以由政府部門方面得到佢哋所需要嘅服務。另外咧喺市府大樓亦都需要多一啲社區嘅聲音，咁所以要帶一啲嘅新血入市府，又等市府入邊有新嘅睇法同埋新嘅見解，咁同埋呢個僵化嘅官僚制度咧亦都需要改革㗎。至於
好，唔該晒。咁啊，其實咧，我哋嘅主持人問嘅問題咧，4條咧，就基本上咧就係仲有 Connie 係爭啲唔記得咗，唔好意思，阿 Connie 輪到你。
Thank you. You know, I think that just for someone who's growing up in San Francisco and just watching and learning about city government, even from my time, and then the moment that I get to become a public servant, I know how critical it is. It's been decades. It's to watch how City Hall really needs to clean up. And we all know, you know, for those been around in San Francisco for a long time, it is not just now. It's been a problem that has been plaguing City Hall for a long time, and that we need to do a cleanup. And it is also for someone like me that to really think about how can we, as who knows the inner workings of the city government, and watching leadership level and knowing that it is really who we elect to the office, especially someone like mayor or someone like the board of supervisors, to make sure that there's checks and balances. And that is why we need to make sure that people that we vote for and that we elect are really the people that really come from the community, and that people who donate to their campaigns are actually everyday people, San Franciscans, and not corporate and special interests. And that is what we need to make sure when we elect people and we put them in office, so that we can really fundamentally change the culture of our city government, making sure that our budget is transparent and that we hold City Hall accountable.
好，中文啦。
多謝晒。咁因為我係三藩市大嘅，咁我一直係睇到住我哋嘅市政府工作。咁然之後，當我成人之後，我就開始正式回饋翻我哋社會喺市政府度工作嘅時候，咁我相信係好多我哋咧喺三藩市多年嚟嘅時候咧，已經知道其實呢個市政府腐敗嘅一個問題或者貪污嘅一個問題咧，唔係今時今日，係其實好多年嚟已經累積落嚟嘅。終於有呢個機會咧，我哋大家知道咗一啲情況，但係其實我哋一直以嚟咁多年嚟，我哋都睇到有唔同嘅事件係發生過嘅貪污嘅事件，咁所以亦都係因為咁樣，我就覺得當我哋投票啊，同埋投票俾一啲譬如講係市長又好，或者係市參事又好咧，當佢哋能夠有一個平衡，能夠知道咧投票俾一啲人咧係唔係一啲有譬如講係大型企業啊，或者係特別有其他嘅去投資俾呢一啲競選，而係真真正正三藩市嘅人去投資喺呢一啲競選團裏邊，係真真正正我哋三藩市每一日嘅居民平民啊，所謂係我哋嘅市民去支持呢啲人去競選嘅，而唔係一啲選出嚟嘅人咧，係只會向一啲大型企業啊或者財團啊去走嘅。咁所以咧，我希望大家即係能夠諗一諗，即係投票嘅時候，我哋所要投出嚟嘅一啲代表咧，係真係能夠代表到我哋每一日嘅市民嘅人嘅聲音。然之後入到去三藩市市政府嘅時候咧，係要求我哋嘅經濟預算啊，同埋財政預算咧，係能夠真係有個透明度嘅。多謝晒。
好，唔該晒 Connie 嘅。咁我哋其實咧就主持人問嘅問題4條咧，就基本上我哋已經全部問晒㗎啦。咁啊到而家呢個時候咧，就輪到我哋3位嘅候選人各自咧就係問佢哋嘅對手1條問題嘅。咁啊，我哋就請阿 Joyce 再主持一下。
So we're done with the moderate question answer. Now is the special question answer from the candidates to your own candidate. We have one question from one candidate. You can point to who you want to ask the question for. And please remember you need to translate your question as well in Cantonese. 咁呢個環節咧就係一個對手互相問答嚇。咁一個候選人咧可以向一位對手提一個問題。咁希望都包括有中英文呢個翻譯在內嘅。So the turn will start with Mahjong and Connie and David. So Mahjong first, please address your question to one of your opponent. Thank you.
So I know, we as supervisor candidates get questions like these a lot, about our school board and our board of education. And, while the board of supervisors does not oversee the school system, we do have oversight over the budget. And so my question for Connie, as you know, I guess a couple of weeks ago now, the board of supervisors seemed to announce an odd time in this pandemic, and also timing-wise, late on a Friday afternoon, that they would be exploring a lottery system for Lowell High School. I have talked about how the timing has been odd and not friendly to families, and that we need to do more to support all families, our underserved families and families who are working class here in not just the Richmond, but in San Francisco. But what is your position on the Lowell lottery proposal?
係翻譯唔該。
麥珍就向陳思敏提出問題，咁就係表示咧喺疫情期間咧嘅一個星期五下晝呢一個校區方面突然間提出咧 Lowell 高中會採取抽籤制度嚟收生㗎。咁佢想問下陳思敏喺呢一件事上面嘅立場係點樣呢？
Well, I am a proud graduate of Galileo High School. So I want to start with that, in San Francisco. And then I'm also a mom of a second grader, of a public school student. And so to me, public school system is very critical to my family on a personal level. And so to think about how critical it is also for my neighbors and for my community, and what really key and when as a parent now is that what I really hope is to have a system that is really fair and equitable, but then no matter which public school you go to, they all actually have the academic excellence. We know that Lowell High School cannot accept all students for the entire San Francisco. So let's really make sure that it is fair and great academic excellence and social excellence for all the schools in San Francisco. That is really what I really look to our board educations to work on.
好，中文方面啦。
咁咧，我因為咧嗱，首先咧就係我係一個Galileo高中畢業生啦嚇，咁喺三藩市畢業嘅。咁但係現時咧，我亦都係一個小朋友，我個仔仔佢係7歲大，佢係第2年班係三藩市公校。咁所以喺我嘅以一個母親，亦都以一個家長嘅睇法嚟講咧，就係我希望所有個學校其實都有好似 Lowell 高中咁樣嘅咁好嘅教育，因為喺我嘅角度嚟講，亦都知道未必係所有嘅學生都可以入到去Lowell 高中嘅，咁所以亦都希望當我哋一啲可能冇辦法入到嘅時候，亦都係有呢個機會能夠仍然有一個好好嘅教育，所以我亦都希望我哋嘅教育委員會咧能夠去積極嘅去改進、去改善我哋其他嘅學校環境嘅。
I'm sorry, do you support the lottery? I might have missed it. Do you support the lottery?
I prefer to 個問題就係嘛，到底我係咪支持呢個 lottery？ 咁我就係因為我亦都好明白我就會係希望我哋嘅教育委員會佢能夠做出一個明智嘅決定。So what I'm saying is I actually defer to the board education members to make these decisions, and I hope that they make these decisions wisely, because as a parent, what I really care is all school education.
Okay, thank you. Now it's Connie's turn to ask one question. 而家係陳思敏可以問一個對手問題。
Great. This goes to I think kind of relevant. American community when we think about education in this November is Prop 16, and just wanted to know, Marjan, where do you stand on Prop 16? Yes or no, and why?
Connie, you were freezing just a little bit per second, so can you repeat the question, and also in Cantonese too?
Yes. So the question is Prop 16, whether Marjan Fuhauer stands on the issue, yes or no, and why? 其實呢個問題就係俾萬珍嘅，咁想知道咧就係因為當我哋講起教育嚟講咧，尤其是今年11月啦，第16提案，加州第16提案係亦都係我哋一個華人極之關注一個提案，咁所以希望知道萬珍到底係支持啊定係反對嘅。
So I do support Proposition 16. I think that we must preserve affirmative action. I think given what we've talked about in this forum about the anti-Chinese sentiment and also the times that we're living in around social justice, we must uplift our communities and have equity in all our communities. That's why I support Proposition 16. So that was my answer.
麥真啱啱就表示咧，佢支持加州16號提案，對於呢個反華嘅情緒要採取積極嘅行動，喺社區發起運動去保護我哋嘅社區。Back to you.
Okay, now it's David's turn to ask a question to the opponent. 而家係李志威就問一個問題，請都記得要講中英文嚇。Thank you.
Connie, if you were on the Board of Supervisors 4 weeks ago, when the board had to make a decision on closing the budget gap by either increasing salaries on city workers or deferring increases to city workers, which way would you have voted? Would you have voted to increase salaries as Supervisor Fewer did, or would you have voted against increasing salaries?
李志威想問 Connie 你嘅決定係如果係4個禮拜之前你已經係試參試嘅時候，在嗰個預算委員會嘅決定嘅時候，話我哋啲預算呢要減低個收支平衡嘅時候，你係贊成增加試參試嘅嗰啲收入呢，定係你會反對？
好 ，Connie。
但係個問題唔係市參市嘅收入，而係市政府公員嘅收入。
Yes.
我就係想我諗李志威嘅問題係，只不過想知道即係市參市例上喺4個禮拜之前決定咗會增加我哋嘅政府員工嘅收入，而唔係市參市嘅收入。咁市政府員工嘅收入咧，我係會支持。點解咧？因為我哋都好清楚喺呢一個疫情嘅期間咧，我哋嘅市政府員工咧係不斷嘅提供一啲緊急嘅服務嘅，亦都係讓我哋能夠繼續咧控制到呢個疫情。咁喺呢個情況之下咧，我哋需要我哋嘅市政府員工咧繼續嘅能夠去努力啊，為我哋嘅市政府提供呢啲工作啊，仲有就係能夠繼續嘅去為我哋嘅市政府服務啦。咁所以我係會支持市參市例上嘅決定，因為我知道我哋係需要佢哋繼續嘅平衡於我哋嘅市政府服務，當讓我哋能夠繼續有健康同埋安全嘅社區服務嘅。So I'm going to say this in English. I'm sorry, I'm flipping it backwards. So I think the question is really about whether we will increase city workers' salaries and decision made by Supervisor Sandra Lee Fewer. And in my place, I say yes. I will actually make the very same decision. And the reason why is because I know during this pandemic how hard the city workers been working during this emergency situation, where they will actually keep us healthy and safe. And we need to keep them continue working and maintain that level of city services so that we can get through this pandemic, so that we can actually continue to be remaining safe and healthy as a city. So that's what I will make the same decision.
好，咁啊唔該晒阿 Connie 嘅，咁啊跟住落嚟咧就應該係輪到3位嘅候選人各自一個嘅總結啦。
Yes. Now the end to our debate, we have the ending or closing statement from all the candidates, and actually the turns rotate back to Connie, David and Marshall. 咁而家就係3位候選人嘅總結發言，每個就2分鐘，包括中英文在內嚇。咁個次序又會翻嚟就陳思敏、李志威同埋埋陣。Thank you.
好，陳思敏先。
Thank you so much, Singta Radio, for hosting this. It is very challenging during this time, and I so appreciate the opportunity and also opportunity to be able to speak to my Chinese American community directly in Chinese. I want you to know that I'm really proud to be running as a Chinese American. I'm so proud to be able to run as a first-generation immigrant, to be able to represent our Chinese American community, and also be able to speak to our community in both Mandarin and Cantonese. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I truly hope to have that chance and the opportunity to serve all of you in a new capacity and as a leader. And because I know that we need to stand together and unite together, and I know that we need to have a voice, and I'm committed to be the voice for the Chinese American community in city government, to make sure that we protect our rights in the many years to come.
好，中文。
多謝晒，咁我好首先咧，多謝星島中文電台咧，俾我哋呢個機會能夠有呢個談論。咁最主要其實咧，亦都好多謝能夠讓我有呢個機會直接以中文嘅同我哋嘅聽眾有一個溝通嘅機會。咁尤其是因為我係華人啦，咁你又識得講中文嘅華人，咁我覺得我好榮幸有呢個機會能夠去成為一個候選人，因為當我呢個競選嘅時候咧，我又覺得亦都俾我一個機會能夠代表到我哋嘅華人社區。而家喺呢個情況之下咧，我覺得我哋華人社區需要有一個聲音，能夠有一個人代表到佢哋，同佢哋喺市政府裏邊出聲，能夠亦都可以直接以中文、國語啦同埋廣東話去直接同我哋嘅市民溝通，讓我哋能夠了解到佢哋嘅心聲。能夠有市政府有一個人直接可以代表到佢哋，因為我哋華人應該社區團結一起，有個華人嘅代表。多謝晒。
Thank you. Now, David.
I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to the community. We are heading into the final days of this election, and I just call upon the Chinese community to think about their families, their future in this city. We know that the Chinese American community has suffered greatly during the pandemic. Our businesses have closed. We've lost our life savings, many of us. Many of us are losing their homes. And we are suffering. So I'm working to stop the tax increases to help our community. I also call upon the candidates and upon their supporters to respect the Chinese American community. We may not agree with each other, but we should not resort to xenophobic and racist attacks on candidates that are undeserving and unbecoming of this community. So I call upon all the candidates to respect each of us and to work together in harmony so that we can rebuild our community during the pandemic.
好，翻譯唔該。
好多謝星島舉辦呢次論壇，所以我有機會同社區各位溝通。我哋華人社區喺呢次疫情同埋經濟嘅情形之下，我哋受害好深。我嘅強烈追求係減少稅務，而家好多稅務增加嘅法案，呢個對我哋係雪上加霜嘅傷害。仲有呢，我希望我哋大家華人呢能夠彼此尊重，又希望成個社區尊重我哋華人嘅社區，彼此要特別尊重候選人之間，唔好互相攻擊。咁我哋希望我哋嘅華人喺呢個社區同埋喺呢個三藩市能夠得到最安全最好嘅生活，改善我哋嘅經濟，所以我哋唔會再受嗰啲我哋嘅存款啊，我哋嘅生意唔會經濟上邊再受嚴重嘅傷害。多謝。
Okay, Marshall, please.
So thank you again, Sing Tao, for hosting this incredibly critical conversation for our Chinese community. I'm running for supervisor because I want our neighborhoods to have a voice in City Hall. As I mentioned in my introduction, I have 30 years experience in both business and government. I think we need more people who have outside experience in government and in business to be part of the decision-making process in City Hall. I think we need to address homelessness, making sure people have shelter, addressing mental illness, as well as substance use disorder, which so many of San Franciscans are suffering from on our streets. I think we need safer communities. We need to ensure that our police department has the resources that they need to serve, in particular, our Chinese American community in light of everything that we've been seeing. We need our streets to be cleaner and safer. But just also to touch upon David and Connie's comments, I know we're in the last 2 weeks. I know things can really get ramped up. I have a different name and I'm hearing all about it. I've heard about it all my life, and it's something we're seeing on a national level. But I would like to issue an open invitation to David and to Connie to work together on the anti-Chinese sentiment that we're seeing in our community. I know it's not the most typical thing to do in the last 2 weeks, but to work with all the candidates in this race to denounce what we're seeing in our community and to really focus on the issues. Thank you.
好，中文翻譯唔該。
麥珍咧啱啱總結咗佢今日出席呢一個由星島中文電台舉辦辯論會嘅一番感受。佢首先表示多謝星島。另外咧，佢重申佢有30年嘅公職經驗，咁而市府大樓咧係需要有多啲社區嘅聲音。咁除咗有公職經驗，仲要有其他經驗，譬如係小商業方面。另外，麥珍都重申佢嘅政綱重點係處理無家可歸者嘅問題，同埋要有更加乾淨同埋更加安全嘅街道。另外咧，佢亦都想邀請佢嘅對手陳思敏同埋李志威咧，可以共同處理反華情緒嘅問題。因為咧喺呢個大流行疫症一個疫症咧肆虐之時，大家都受緊苦。Back to you。
好，唔該晒。
Thank you so much. Thank you for Connie, David and Mahjong. It's a great debate and we want to remind everybody, just remember to vote before or on November 3rd. 多謝大家，多謝3位陳思敏、李志威同埋麥珍出席我哋嘅辯論會，都提醒各位應該係11月3號或者之前投票。
係啦，咁我哋今日嘅呢一個現場辯論嘅節目時間呢都到此為止啦。咁我哋咧就將時間交翻俾以下落嚟嘅節目。多謝晒各位嘅收聽同埋收睇，拜拜。